The first scream did not come from the fire. It came from a little girl clutching her mother's skirt, watching Zara Whitcomb lower her eyes instead of fighting back, as though kindness had become the only shield she had left. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love finds the broken. Now back to Zara. Dawn settled gently over Ashbourne Park, painting the pine forest in pale silver while the village slowly awakened beneath drifting mist. Yet even the quiet beauty of morning could not soften the invisible distance surrounding the young woman walking alone along the narrow path. Conversations faded whenever she passed. Doors closed a little faster. Curious eyes lingered only long enough to remind her she did not belong. At 22, Zara carried a name almost no one spoke anymore. To the pack, she was simply the Wolfless Omega, the girl whose spirit had never awakened, the living reminder of everything they feared the moon goddess might one day abandon. Children had grown up hearing warnings not to become like her. Adults whispered that misfortune followed wherever she walked. Zara had stopped trying to change their minds years ago. Instead, she chose the quieter path. Every sunrise found her gathering healing herbs for Mara Ellison before tending neglected gardens, repairing torn blankets for elderly neighbors, or leaving fresh bread outside cottages where pride would never allow anyone to ask for help. Most never knew who had cared for them. She preferred it that way. As she crossed the village square, the same little girl who had cried moments earlier stumbled while carrying a wooden bucket far too heavy for her small hands. Water spilled across the stones. Before the child's embarrassed mother could react, Zara knelt beside her, lifted the bucket with gentle ease, and smiled as though nothing unfortunate had happened. The girl hesitated before whispering, "Thank you." Her mother quickly pulled her away without returning the kindness, but the child looked back over her shoulder one last time. Zara simply waved. Around her neck rested a smooth white pendant shaped like a falling tear, suspended from a worn silver chain. It had belonged to her mother, Lillian Whitcomb, whose voice had become little more than a fading memory carried by the passing seasons. Yet every time Zara's fingers closed around the pendant, she remembered one sentence spoken long ago with quiet certainty. Never let the world convince you that gentleness is weakness. Those words had carried her through years of rejection more faithfully than any wolf ever could. The heavy doors of the council hall suddenly opened. Caleb Whitcomb emerged wearing the ceremonial black cloak reserved for Ashbourne's alpha, followed by Marissa in elegant crimson and Brielle wrapped in shimmering silver. Together they looked every bit the family admired throughout the Northern Territories. Only Zara remained outside the picture, standing several paces away as though an unseen line had separated them for years. Marissa's expression never softened. "Be certain you stay where no one notices you tonight." Brielle offered a polished smile that never reached her eyes. "Father has worked too hard rebuilding our family's reputation. Don't give the guests another reason to remember you." Neither waited for an answer. Zara watched them disappear before quietly releasing a slow breath. Hurt had become familiar enough that she no longer argued with it. Moments later, Mara Ellison approached carrying bundles of freshly cut herbs. Without speaking, the elderly healer gently straightened Zara's shawl, then rested weathered fingers over the white pendant. "Some gifts sleep," she murmured, "not because they are gone, but because the world is not ready to see them awaken." Before Zara could ask what she meant, deep bronze horns echoed across the valley. Every conversation stopped. Wolves abandoned their work. Even the birds burst from the trees in startled flight. A royal convoy had crossed the northern ridge. The Alpha King was approaching Ashbourne. At that exact moment, hidden beneath Zara's hand, the white pendant released the faintest pulse of warmth, as if somewhere beyond the forest, something ancient had finally recognized her. Warmth spread through the white stone until Zara instinctively closed her hand around it, startled by the pulse traveling beneath her fingertips. The sensation disappeared almost as quickly as it had come, leaving only a faint trace against her skin, as though the pendant had awakened for a heartbeat before returning to silence. She slipped it beneath her simple dress and followed the stream of villagers gathering in the center of Ashbourne. Long crimson banners fluttered from carved wooden poles while servants polished the ancient stones surrounding the ceremonial grounds. Excitement filled the air, yet beneath it lingered another feeling, unease. The blood moon gathering had always demanded obedience, but this year every whispered rumor carried unusual urgency. Elder Gideon Crane stepped onto the raised platform, his silver robes embroidered with symbols older than any living wolf. His weathered voice rolled across the crowd with practiced authority. For generations, our ancestors have remained under the moon goddess's favor because impurity has never been allowed to take root. His gaze swept over the assembly before settling on Zara for the briefest moment. Tonight, the altar will judge whether Ashbourne remains worthy of its blessings. A chill settled over the gathering despite the afternoon sun. Mothers instinctively pulled their children closer. Even seasoned warriors lowered their eyes. Zara felt dozens of strangers studying her without a single accusation being spoken aloud. She already understood what many of them were thinking. When fear searched for a face, it always found hers first. Caleb remained expressionless beside the council members, offering neither reassurance nor denial. Marissa folded elegant hands before her, as though everything unfolding were nothing more than necessary tradition. Brielle stood proudly near the front, accepting admiring smiles from young wolves eager to win her attention. No one looked toward Zara except with quiet relief that they themselves had never become the pack's burden. As the assembly dispersed, Rowan Hayes intercepted Zara near the old well where she filled wooden buckets every afternoon. His broad shoulders blocked the narrow path, uncertainty written across features usually admired for confidence. "You should leave before sunset," he said quietly. "Go somewhere beyond the eastern border until the gathering is over." Zara searched his face. "If I disappear, they'll accuse my father of hiding me." Rowan's jaw tightened. Sometimes survival matters more than honor. She offered a weary smile that carried no bitterness, only acceptance. "You know as well as I do that I have nowhere to run." Rowan looked away first. His silence revealed more than any promise could have. Before either could continue, Brielle's bright laughter echoed across the square. "There you are," she called sweetly. "Father has been looking everywhere for you." She approached with graceful confidence, trailed by several young women who admired nearly everything she did. "The council needs every family present tonight, even forgotten branches of the bloodline." Her words sounded gentle enough for strangers, yet every syllable landed with deliberate precision. Zara simply nodded and continued toward Mara Ellison's small healing cottage. The familiar scent of dried lavender and cedar welcomed her inside. Mara carefully sorted bundles of herbs before glancing toward the pendant now visible above Zara's collar. "Has it changed?" the healer asked softly. Zara hesitated before admitting. It became warm when the royal horns sounded. Mara's hands paused. For an instant, something resembling hope flickered across her lined face before disappearing behind careful restraint. "Whatever happens tonight," she murmured while wrapping fresh comfort leaves into a cloth pouch, "do not remove that necklace. Not for anyone." Before Zara could ask why, hurried footsteps pounded outside. A young messenger burst through the doorway, breathless with panic. "Elder Gideon has summoned every council member to the altar," he gasped. "The sacred markings have changed, and the elders say the blood altar has demanded a living offering before the Alpha King enters Ashbourne." The messenger's words spread across Ashbourne faster than the evening wind. Within minutes, every path leading toward the sacred grounds filled with anxious voices. Elders abandoned their meetings, warriors tightened patrols, and servants hurried to decorate the village as though celebration and catastrophe had somehow become the same event. Zara Whitcomb followed Caleb through the growing crowd without resistance. The white pendant hidden beneath her dress still carried a faint warmth, no longer startling her, but refusing to let her forget it was there. Every few steps, she instinctively pressed her fingers against it, finding comfort she could not explain. Beyond the northern ridge, a line of riders emerged between towering pines. Their midnight armor reflected the fading sunlight, each breastplate bearing the silver crest of the northern bloodlines. Conversations died immediately. The Alpha King's royal escort had arrived. At their center rode Damon Blackwell. His expression remained unreadable as his gaze swept across Ashbourne, lingering not on the welcoming banners or ceremonial preparations, but on the ancient blood altar rising above the clearing. Something about the carvings disturbed him. He had seen symbols like these before, in forgotten royal archives sealed long before his birth. For nearly 7 years he had quietly searched abandoned temples, burned libraries, and ruined sanctuaries after discovering fragments of a forgotten prophecy describing a bloodline capable of commanding the first flame. Every investigation had ended the same way. Missing records, dead witnesses, entire histories deliberately erased. Then reports from Ashbourne reached the capital. A pack preparing an unusually secretive blood moon ceremony. An altar showing signs of awakening. A young woman called Wolfless. Too many impossible details had gathered in one place for coincidence. Damon had not come merely to attend a ceremony. He had come to discover who was trying to awaken something buried beneath the mountain, and who had spent decades hiding the truth. As horses slowed before the village entrance, Captain Elias Mercer quietly guided his mount alongside the king's. "Your Majesty," he murmured, careful not to be overheard. "If the council intends human sacrifice, we can stop it before sunset." Damon kept watching the altar. "Not yet." Elias frowned. "An innocent could die. If we move before the one behind this reveals himself," Damon answered softly. "We save one life today and lose countless others tomorrow. Someone has spent years preparing this ritual. Tonight they will finally step into the light." His words carried no hesitation, only the burden of a decision he clearly despised making. As Caleb escorted Zara toward the council circle, Damon noticed her for the first time. She walked without bitterness despite the wary glances surrounding her. When an elderly villager stumbled over an uneven stone, she instinctively reached out to steady him even though iron judgment already hung over her own future. The old man accepted her help before realizing who she was. Embarrassed by his own kindness, he quickly stepped away without a word. Damon watched the exchange in silence. Fear had taught this village to reject the gentlest soul among them. Later, while the council argued over preparations, Zara slipped away to draw water from a quiet spring beyond the gathering. She believed herself alone until a calm voice broke the silence behind her. "Most people run from a place that looks at them the way this village looks at you." She turned to find a tall traveler dressed in a dark cloak, his face partly hidden beneath the evening shadow. She did not recognize the Alpha King standing before her. "If I leave," she answered after a thoughtful pause, "Fear will believe it was right." Damon studied her for several seconds. He had expected anger, resentment, despair. Instead, he found quiet courage wrapped inside extraordinary loneliness. Before he could reply, the distant sound of ceremonial horns echoed once more across the valley. The council had reached its decision. Damon watched Zara hurry back toward the sacred grounds, and for the first time since beginning his long search, an uneasy certainty settled over him. Whatever had been sleeping beneath the blood altar was no longer waiting. Rowan Hayes stopped at the foot of the ancient altar, then stepped aside as though ashamed to remain beside Zara for even another heartbeat. The circle of elders slowly closed around her, their dark ceremonial robes shifting in the evening wind while hundreds of silent faces watched from beyond the carved stones. Elder Gideon Crane lifted both hands, his voice echoing across the sacred clearing. "For centuries, this altar has protected Ashbourne from famine, plague, and ruin. Tonight it has spoken again." He lowered the tip of his staff onto one of the glowing carvings. Crimson light spread through the cracks like living veins beneath stone. A collective gasp swept through the gathering. The offering has already been chosen. Every eye turned toward Zara. No one looked surprised, only relieved. Caleb Whitcomb stood without moving, his expression carved from the same stone beneath his feet. Marissa lowered her head with practiced dignity, hiding the satisfaction that briefly crossed her face. Brielle's lips curved into the faintest smile before she disguised it behind false sympathy. Zara searched the crowd once, hoping to find a single voice willing to question what was happening. She found only lowered gazes and fearful silence. "I have committed no crime," she said, her quiet words carrying farther than she expected. "Then why am I standing here?" Elder Gideon answered before anyone else could speak. "Because impurity itself is enough." The sentence struck harder than any shout. Murmurs rippled through the spectators, not in protest, but in agreement. Gideon continued, "A wolfless omega is an offense against the order the moon goddess established. The altar demands restoration before the Alpha King enters these lands. Zara slowly turned toward her father. Is that what you believe? Caleb held her eyes for a long, unbearable moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried neither anger nor affection. I believe my first duty is to protect this pack. The answer settled over Zara with devastating clarity. She had not lost her family tonight. She had never truly had one. A sharp gust swept across the clearing, extinguishing several nearby torches before immediately reigniting them with taller crimson flames. The strange hooded traveler standing beside the royal guards narrowed his silver eyes at the altar, studying the unnatural fire instead of Zara. Almost imperceptibly, he took one cautious step forward before another armored guard quietly blocked his path. Whatever he intended, this was not yet his moment. Elder Gideon raised a ceremonial dagger and sliced his own palm, allowing several drops of blood to fall onto the center of the black stone. The glowing symbols pulsed violently. Deep beneath everyone's feet, a low vibration rolled through the earth. Several elders exchanged uneasy glances. This was stronger than any remembered ritual. Gideon masked his concern behind louder conviction. At moonrise, he declared, the sacred flames will judge whether the sacrifice is accepted. Two warriors approached Zara with forged iron restraints, fastening them around her wrists despite her complete lack of resistance. As cold metal closed against her skin, the white pendant hidden beneath her dress suddenly released another wave of warmth, far stronger than before. For the briefest instant, the nearest carved symbol flickered from crimson to brilliant white before returning to its original color. Only the hooded stranger seemed to notice. His expression changed for the first time since arriving, not with fear, but with unmistakable recognition. Beneath his breath, so quietly that no one else could hear, he whispered a single sentence. They've chosen the wrong girl. Moonrise painted the shattered clouds in deep crimson as silence settled across Ashbourne with the weight of a final farewell. Zara Whitcomb knelt alone upon the ancient altar, cold iron circling her wrists while hundreds of wolves stood beyond the carved stones without daring to breathe. No voice called her name. No hand reached toward her. The village she had quietly served for years now watched as though she had never belonged among them. Elder Gideon Crane stepped forward carrying the ceremonial torch with both hands. Its flame burned darker than ordinary fire, shifting from scarlet to almost black before returning to crimson again. Even the oldest elders exchanged uneasy glances. This was not how the sacred flame was supposed to look. Gideon noticed their hesitation but forced confidence into his voice. The moon goddess has accepted our offering, he declared. Ashbourne will endure. Only one man in the gathering knew those words were already a lie. Standing among the royal escort, Damon Blackwell watched unfamiliar symbols spread beneath the altar like veins beneath living stone. Every forgotten manuscript he had uncovered during 7 years of searching returned to his mind at once. The first flame never demanded innocent blood. Someone had twisted an ancient rite into something unrecognizable. Captain Elias Mercer stepped beside him, unable to hide his urgency. Your Majesty, give the order. Damon did not answer immediately. His jaw tightened as his eyes remained fixed on the center of the altar. If he intervened now, Zara might survive. But the hidden architect behind this corruption would disappear into the confusion, taking with him the truth Damon had pursued for years. If he waited, the woman before him would stand alone against a force no one fully understood. It was the cruelest decision of his reign. Hold the line, he whispered at last, the words sounding more like a burden than a command. The moment forbidden magic reveals itself, we move. Several guards exchanged uncertain glances, but none questioned him again. Hidden beyond the outer ring of spectators, Victor Crowley quietly traced ancient symbols into the earth with the tip of his boot. Each movement awakened another thread of darkness beneath the mountain. He did not watch Zara. He watched the altar itself, anticipation burning in his eyes. Wake, he murmured almost lovingly. I've waited long enough. Zara lifted her face toward the rising moon. Fear remained inside her, but it no longer ruled her. Her fingers found the white pendant beneath her dress one final time. Though surrounded by strangers, she remembered her mother's gentle voice telling her that kindness was never wasted, even when no one returned it. That memory steadied her more than courage ever could. Caleb Whitcomb stood only a few yards away. For an instant his hand twitched toward his daughter before years of pride, expectation, and fear chained him motionless once again. Rowan Hayes noticed the movement and closed his eyes in quiet anguish. He understood that the Alpha of Ashbourne had already lost something far greater than authority. Elder Gideon lowered the torch toward the ancient basin carved into the heart of the altar. The instant the fire touched its surface, the crimson blaze exploded upward with terrifying force. The earth convulsed beneath every pair of feet. Black symbols burst across the stone in patterns that had never belonged to any sacred ceremony. Damon drew his sword in one fluid motion. "Now," he shouted. Royal guards surged forward. At that same instant Victor Crowley smiled. Too late. The corrupted fire rose like a living tide, sweeping past the guards before anyone could reach the center. In a single blinding heartbeat, the ancient blaze closed around Zara completely, hiding her from every eye beneath a tower of crimson light. The roaring inferno swallowed Zara Whitcomb so completely that the crowd recoiled in terror, shielding their faces from the violent surge of heat. For one endless heartbeat, no one could see the young woman they had condemned. The crimson blaze twisted upward like a living storm, carrying sparks into the moonlit sky, while the ancient altar groaned beneath a force it had not borne for generations. Elder Gideon Crane smiled with grim satisfaction, believing judgment had finally been delivered. Then the impossible happened. The deafening roar softened. Instead of spreading beyond the stone circle, the fire folded inward, swirling around an unseen center as though answering an invisible command. The violent heat that should have consumed flesh became strangely gentle. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Mara Ellison stared without blinking, tears spilling freely down her weathered cheeks. "Lillian," she whispered, her trembling voice barely audible. Inside the blazing light, Zara expected agony. Instead, she felt only warmth unlike anything she had ever known. It wrapped around her like familiar arms, carrying the faint scent of cedar and wildflowers she had not remembered since childhood. Somewhere within the brilliance, a woman's calm voice echoed through her heart. "You were never empty." Zara's breathing caught. "Mother." No answer came. Only another wave of quiet reassurance that dissolved years of loneliness she had carried since childhood. Around her neck, the white pendant began to glow until its pale radiance shone through the flames themselves. Fine cracks spread across its smooth surface before the stone separated into two perfect halves without falling. Hidden inside rested a tiny silver emblem shaped like an ancient flame. Outside the circle, Damon Blackwell threw back the hood concealing his identity. The assembled wolves immediately dropped to one knee as recognition swept through the clearing, but their Alpha King ignored every gesture of loyalty. His silver eyes locked onto the emblem resting against Zara's heart. He knew that symbol. For 7 years he had searched forgotten temples and sealed royal archives for its meaning, studying the same ancient illustration preserved inside a manuscript so old it had nearly turned to dust. Until this night, he had feared it was nothing more than legend. "Stand down," he ordered as several royal guards rushed toward the altar. "No one interferes." One captain stared at him in disbelief. "Your Majesty, she'll die." Damon answered without hesitation. No, the certainty in his voice silenced everyone. Every fragment of the prophecy he had spent years assembling suddenly fit together. The first flame had never been searching for a victim. It had been waiting for its rightful guardian to return. Hidden among the spectators, Victor Crowley's confidence faltered for the first time. This was not the outcome he had engineered. The forbidden ritual should have devoured its victim, feeding the darkness sealed beneath the mountain. Instead, the ancient power refused to obey him. Hairline fractures spread across the black stone beneath Zara's feet, releasing streams of brilliant white light that pierced through the crimson glow. Elder Gideon staggered backward, gripping his staff as panic overtook conviction. "This cannot be," he whispered. "The altar accepts only sacrifice." Mara lifted her voice across the stunned silence. "No," she said, meeting Gideon's frightened eyes. "The altar remembers." Every word struck with quiet authority. Caleb finally looked toward his daughter, uncertainty replacing the certainty that had carried him through the ceremony. Brielle's proud expression dissolved into visible fear. Rowan Hayes took one hesitant step forward before freezing again, torn between obedience and the desperate need to protect the woman he had failed. Within the radiant vortex, Zara slowly opened her eyes. The restraints around her wrists had melted away without leaving so much as a mark. Every flame surrounding her bent lower, moving with deliberate grace rather than destruction. Beyond the shimmering light, she saw Damon Blackwell clearly for the first time. Their eyes met across the altar. Before anyone could speak, every torch surrounding the sacred ground extinguished at once, leaving only the luminous fire encircling Zara. And then, as though recognizing its rightful sovereign at last, the living flames bowed before her. No one breathed. Even the wind seemed to abandon the valley as every torch surrounding the shattered blood altar surrendered to darkness, leaving only the living crimson fire encircling Zara Whitcomb. The flames no longer raged. They no longer reached to destroy. One by one, they lowered around her until they rested against the fractured stone like loyal guardians bowing before their rightful queen. An overwhelming stillness settled across Ashbourne. Wolves who had stood in judgment only moments before suddenly found their knees weakening beneath an ancient presence far older than any alpha's command. Elder Gideon Crane's staff slipped from his trembling hands, striking the stone with a hollow crack that echoed through the silent clearing. "This cannot be," he whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from the impossible sight. Mara Ellison stepped forward slowly, tears shimmering beneath the moonlight. "No," she answered with quiet certainty. "This is what should have happened long ago." Zara remained motionless within the circle of living fire. She looked across the faces surrounding her, the neighbors she had quietly served, the elders who had condemned her, the family who had abandoned her. Yet not a single flame reflected their fear. Every ember waited only for her choice. Damon Blackwell crossed the fractured altar alone. His royal guards instinctively started after him before stopping in astonishment as the crimson fire parted of its own accord, opening a clear path that no king could command and no warrior could force. Damon halted before Zara. For several silent moments, neither spoke. Then, beneath the blood moon and before every wolf gathered in Ashbourne, the Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. "Bear witness," he declared, his steady voice carrying across the valley. "The altar has rendered its verdict." He lifted his eyes to meet Zara's. It did not spare her. His gaze settled upon the living flames surrounding her. It recognized her. At once the first flame bowed even lower, answering not to Damon, but to the truth itself. A powerful wave rolled outward from the altar. One after another, wolves throughout the clearing found themselves unable to remain standing. Knees touched the earth, not because their king demanded obedience, but because the ancient power surrounding Zara accepted no deception. Caleb Whitcomb lowered his head as tears gathered in his eyes. Brielle covered her mouth in disbelief. Rowan Hayes willingly knelt, no longer out of fear, but out of reverence. Damon slowly rose and faced the stunned council. "You believed strength could only wear the shape of a wolf," he said. "You mistook silence for emptiness and compassion for weakness." Mara rested one hand over her heart. Lillian Whitcomb died protecting a truth this council chose to bury. Her voice remained calm, yet every word carried the weight of generations. There has never been a wolfless child in her bloodline. The flamebound do not answer to wolves. They answer to the first flame. Shock rippled through the gathering as decades of fear collapsed beneath a single revelation. Then slow applause echoed from beyond the outer ring. Victor Crowley emerged from the drifting shadows wearing the satisfied smile of a man whose final move had unfolded exactly as planned. "Magnificent," he said softly. "For generations I searched for the last flame-bound, because only her blood could awaken what slept beneath this mountain." His gaze never left Zara. "You believed you were saving her." He smiled faintly. "You have just unlocked the prison I spent a lifetime trying to open." Dark symbols erupted beneath the shattered altar, spreading like cracks across frozen glass. The white blossoms growing between the stones folded closed as the mountain answered with a deafening roar. Victor stood perfectly still, watching Zara with quiet triumph. "Now," he whispered, "the real trial begins." The mountain's thunder gradually faded into an unfamiliar silence. Dust drifted through the pale moonlight as fractured stones settled beneath countless uncertain footsteps. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The wolves of Ashbourne stood motionless, watching the young woman they had condemned only moments earlier. The living fire still surrounded Zara Whitcomb, but it had changed. The towering crimson blaze had softened into a quiet circle of warm light, shielding rather than threatening everything within its reach. Across the shattered altar, Victor Crowley refused to surrender. "This isn't over," he hissed, lifting both hands toward the widening fissure beneath the mountain. Dark symbols raced across the broken stone once more as he called upon the forbidden power that had answered him for years. For a single heartbeat, the valley held its breath. Then nothing. The darkness trembled, weakened, and slowly unraveled into drifting black ash before vanishing into the night. The mountain no longer answered him. The blood altar had withdrawn its witness. Disbelief spread across Victor's face. He tried again, desperation replacing confidence. Still nothing. Behind him, the royal guards advanced without urgency. They no longer needed drawn weapons. Victor's greatest strength had abandoned him before they ever reached his side. Iron shackles closed around his wrists, and for the first time in many years, he lowered his head without resistance. Zara watched in silence. She neither celebrated nor sought revenge. The fire surrounding her remained calm, as though reflecting the choice she had already made. Nearby, a frightened little boy lost his footing as another section of cracked stone shifted beneath him. Rowan Hayes reacted before anyone could shout a warning. He threw himself across the broken ground, caught the child just before the edge collapsed, and carried him safely back into his mother's arms. The woman who had once avoided Zara's kindness looked at Rowan, then toward Zara, unable to hide the shame filling her eyes. Mara Ellison quietly smiled. Fear had ruled this village for generations. Tonight, compassion had moved first. Caleb Whitcomb slowly removed the alpha medallion from around his neck. He crossed the altar alone, stopping at the very place where his daughter had been forced to kneel. Without speaking, he laid the heavy symbol of his authority upon the cracked stone and stepped back. He offered no excuse, no defense, only the silent surrender of the pride that had cost him his family. Elder Gideon watched for a long moment before placing his ceremonial staff beside the medallion. One by one, the remaining council members followed, laying down the symbols of offices they had protected more fiercely than truth itself. Their titles remained. Their certainty did not. Damon Blackwell quietly sheathed his sword before walking toward Zara. He stopped beside her instead of in front of her, leaving the path ahead entirely hers to choose. Their eyes met briefly. Nothing needed to be spoken. The gesture alone declared that he would never stand between her and her own destiny. Zara slowly opened her hand. The silver flame-bound emblem resting against her palm glowed with gentle warmth. At once, the remaining crimson fire spread across the shattered altar in silent waves. Wherever its light passed, broken stone became solid once more, and delicate white blossoms emerged through every healed crack. The place prepared for execution, it transformed into a living garden beneath the moon. The same little girl Zara had helped that morning stepped cautiously toward the flowers. This time her mother did not pull her away. She simply placed a reassuring hand upon her daughter's shoulder and nodded. Smiling shyly, the child knelt and picked the very first blossom. Around them, villagers who had once stood divided began lifting fallen stones together, rebuilding the sacred ground with their own hands. Above the valley, the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon, promising that the longest night Ashbourne had ever known was finally coming to an end. Dawn arrived without fanfare. Golden light filtered through the towering pines, washing away the crimson glow that had ruled the valley through the longest night Ashbourne had ever known. Where the blood altar had once stood as a place of judgment, white blossoms now covered the fractured stone, blooming from every crack as though the mountain itself had chosen remembrance over fear. Victor Crowley stood surrounded by royal guards, iron restraints secured around his wrists. He stared at the transformed altar in stunned silence. "End it," he said at last, his voice hollow. "You have every reason." Zara Whitcomb looked at him for a long moment. The silver flame-bound emblem rested quietly against her heart, no longer blazing with power, but glowing with steady warmth. She neither raised her hand nor looked away. "If this place begins with another act of vengeance," she answered softly, "then nothing truly changes." Damon Blackwell gave a silent nod. Without ceremony or triumph, the guards escorted Victor away to face judgment before the united northern packs. His defeat had begun long before the chains closed around his wrists. It had begun the moment the first flame refused to obey fear. The valley grew still once more. Caleb Whitcomb slowly crossed the restored altar carrying the Alpha medallion he had surrendered during the night. He paused before the gathered pack, then carefully removed the engraved wolf crest from its center and placed it upon the stone where Zara had once been condemned. The metal echoed gently as it came to rest. "No title," he said quietly, "is worth abandoning your own child." No one interrupted him. Elder Gideon Crane stepped forward next, laying his ceremonial staff beside the broken crest. "Let the records of Ashbourne be rewritten," he declared. "Lillian Whitcomb shall be remembered as the guardian she truly was. Zara Whitcomb shall never again be called cursed." Around them, the remaining elders bowed their heads in silent agreement. Nearby, Rowan Hayes worked alongside villagers rebuilding the worn stone steps leading to the altar, while Brielle knelt beside Mara Ellison, planting the first white blossoms into the newly healed earth. No speeches were needed. Every hand rebuilding what had once been destroyed spoke more honestly than words ever could. Damon approached Zara, but stopped at her side instead of before her. "The Northern Kingdom searched generations for the last flame-bound," he said quietly, "not to place a crown above her, but to ensure she would never have to stand alone again." Zara turned toward the valley where families were working together beneath the morning sun. She smiled with peaceful certainty. "Then let this be the first promise we keep," she replied. "No child will ever face this altar in fear again." Damon offered his hand. After a brief glance at the blooming altar behind them, Zara accepted it, not because she needed saving, but because the road ahead deserved two people willing to walk it together. At that moment, the little girl Zara had helped on the morning before everything changed stepped carefully into the garden, holding a single white flower. She placed it upon the altar with both hands before looking up at her mother. "Mama," she asked softly, "was she ever really cursed?" The woman knelt beside her daughter, tears brightening her smile as she watched Zara and Damon standing beneath the morning light. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "She was never cursed. We were the ones who forgot what true strength looked like." The child looked back at the garden where flowers now grew from the place once prepared for fire, and the first rays of sunlight spread across the valley. For generations to come, wolves would return to that hillside not to remember the day they tried to burn a lonely Omega, but to remember the morning compassion changed an entire kingdom, and the day even the flames chose to bow before the one heart that refused to hate.